Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we are going to discuss the 2004 cult classic film Seed of Chucky. This is the fifth Child's Play / Chucky film. It all comes down to timeline. The timeline corresponds now with the year that the film came out, and it's very neat seeing that. So, 98 is when Glenn / Glenda is born. They are the gender fluid child of Tiffany and Chucky. That was 98. And then 6 years later, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. 2004 is when this film takes place because we get a 6 years later jump. And so Glenn is pretty much the focal point. Glenn is a marionette, not a marionette, a ventriloquist puppet in England with this guy. And he's trying to figure out who he is, who they are, right? And so they see that there's a Made in Japan moniker listed on their wrist, and they just need to know where they belong, right? So there's the story that the ventriloquist says, and how they found Glenn, who he calls a different name, in a cemetery in the States, along with this amulet, and he brought them back to perform, right, to compete. Chucky and Tiffany are no more, but there's been now a Hollywood film in production, and I have my Chucky and Tiffany I finally brought them up to discuss them moving forward. They are making a film based on the urban legend of the Chucky and Tiffany murders, right, in Hollywood. So you have these robotics of Chucky and Tiffany, a la the animatronics that they use throughout the films in general. They have them as actual themselves, like acting the scenes out for this film. It's very much Scream changed the genre in 96. Scream changed the horror genre in 96 to be self-aware, for horror characters to be self-aware of what's going on. And Don Mancini is quoted, he's done a few interviews with saying that Scream changed the game, and he wanted to have that influence with changing the genre. So starting out in the pure horror sense of the 88 film, the original Child's Play 88 film, which is, we talked about it brings nostalgia and the warm fuzzies because it's a great 80s slasher film. But then moving forward, 90s and then now the 2000s, the genre changed. So to have the fifth, I was going to say Saw film, the fifth film in this franchise, Child's Play, and Chucky being called Seed of Chucky, being now about a movie based on the murders, a la Scream 3 and Scream 2, that there's movies based on the killings. So it's very cool how one franchise influences another in regards to how the story is going to evolve, how it's going to continue. And then at the end of this, we get a 5 years flash forward to 2009. So it's very neat having all of these timelines going in order and stuff like that. So what's up? How did Chucky and Tiffany, if you will, how did they come back to life? Well, Glenn hitched a ride after escaping the ventriloquist, took a cargo plane to Los Angeles from London, found the studio by, writing himself on a box, the address to be delivered as a prop to the studio, meets his parents via animatronics, but then he realizes he still has the amulet that he's had since he was a kid, and he knows it's from his parents. So he reads the inscription, and then the voodoo magic brings Chucky and Tiffany's souls into the new animatronics, not dolls specifically, but the animatronics that are being used for this film. They are then detached from the cables. They can freely move about. They can bleed and stuff because they're slowly turning human again. And now it's a matter of who's going to be the next victims, who's going to be the bodies that they're going to want to inhabit as humans, because Andy's not in this film again. Andy's not a part of this. He's not really mentioned. It's just a matter of, we don't have to kill the first person we tell anymore because we now have this amulet and we now have the curse. So we can figure out a way to transfer our souls into a body because this amulet that was introduced in the last one that Charles apparently died with in the first film, even though we didn't see it. But again, I'm still pretending that it's under him. So Glenn brings his parents back into these animatronics. They go on killing sprees, but he's afraid. Glenn's afraid. He doesn't want to go killing. He doesn't want to do these things. But then it turns out his twin sister Glenda, and Glenn and Glenda is based off of the Ed Wood film from back in the day, Glenda is the homicidal maniac as her parents are, and Glenn is the opposite of all of them. And Glenn is both Glenn and Glenda can switch back and forth. The fluidity of gender can have Glenn feeling one way and have Glenda feeling another way. So what's cool about this is that this came out in '04. This was high peak, not even high peak. This was like peak introduction to gender fluidity for a lot of individuals back then. '04, I didn't know what that was, and no one really cared to explore it back then. It wasn't as publicized as it is now, and there's a lot of people more comfortable with saying these certain things. Gender's a binary, but it doesn't have to be, or gender's not a binary. There we go. That's the term. Gender's not a binary. That everything is fluid. That gender fluidity, sexual fluidity, it's very fluid. So also gender has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. Gender is between the ears, not the legs. I forget what the saying is, but something to that extent. So it's interesting having that non-cisgender representation in a 2004 film. This is just wild because 2004 is also Mean Girls, right? Mean Girls, you never heard any of those types of conversations coming about. You had Damien, who was too gay to function, and that's the thing that we can't really say anymore, unless we're talking about Mean Girls. Otherwise, we don't explain that. We don't categorize anybody as that statement anymore. So to have the split screen of a three-way call within 2004's Mean Girls, as well as a four-way call, as well as a three-way call, the Seed of Chucky, it was very 2004. That's what people did back then. That's what the kids did back then. That's what the young adults did back then. So it was interesting seeing that, but also comparing that as a timestamp in pop culture. 2004 was Mean Girls. I was there. I remember seeing it with a group of friends. Went to our local movie theater, laughed our asses off. Wonderful time. I will never forget it. So then to have this non-cisgender character as a main character, very important to see that in 2004. And then moving on, the legacy of that character all of these years later. 19 years later, we're now in 2023. 19 years ago, we got the introduction of Glenn. So I remember seeing this in pieces. I never saw the whole thing beginning to end. I knew Glenn/Glenda was a split personality, but it's not really split personality when your twin is inside of you, but then also you're conscious to the gender fluidity. So it's interesting. It's very interesting how it was explained on a biological front. Not even so much a psychological front, but a biological front. And then the concept of how do they become human if they still want to become human. So Chucky then realizes he doesn't want to be human anymore. He just wants to stay as this immortal doll because he doesn't have to get sick. He doesn't have to grow old. He doesn't have to worry about things. There was a John Walters as a paparazzo. Pete Peters was just so cool in this. He played a nice sleazy character, but it was just very neat. He had a great death scene too with sulfuric acid in the photo lab. Very neat. Glenn inadvertently, causing his death, but Glenn showing emotion through this as well, crying, peeing his pants. It was very cool seeing that. It's very different. It's evolution of character development. It's great storytelling. Don does a great story. So I'm very excited to re-see Curse of Chucky, Cult of Chucky. I'm very excited to then see season 1, season 2, and eventually season 3 of Chucky, because Don did everything now moving forward. His characters, his story, his plot points, no matter how blurred you want to try to connect the dots, it still is a functional story. It's still very accurate. So again, it's hard to watch certain scenes of Chucky having to produce sperm in order to have Tiffany artificially inseminate Jennifer Tilly's character, because Jennifer Tilly is the voice of Tiffany, but she's also playing herself as an actress in this. And Tiffany wants to be Jennifer Tilly. Tiffany wants to be that star, right? And then it's now a matter of, if they impregnate Jennifer Tilly with Chucky's sperm, then in theory she can create another human, that she can give birth to a child who then Glenn could be soul-wise transferred into. And then it turns out that Jennifer Tilly is then, within a matter of overnight, because it's a voodoo artificial insemination, so of course things are different, she gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, for Glenn and Glenda, both. So then Tiffany is killed by Chucky, soul transferred into Jennifer. Glenn and Glenda are then, you don't see the soul transfer, but you know it's assumed that there's the soul transfer in between, because then we get a 5 years later to the twins' 5th birthday party, and there's reminiscence of stuff, and then Glenn gets a box from an unnamed source, and it's the severed arm of his dad, Chucky, that he sliced his dad up with an axe in the hospital after saying, "Are you proud of me now, father?" Chop! Wonderful, self-important scene. And then the hand, you know, the arm just reaches up and strangles the 5-year-old child. And then that's it. We cut to credits. So it's a narrow matter of what happens next. But I thought this was very well done. I thought it was a very important conversation piece within gender fluidity, within non-cisgendered individuals. The bringing of the normalcy to it. In 2004, bro, this was 19 years ago. That was ahead of its time. Well ahead of its time. It's very interesting having that within pop culture, especially being introduced within the 5th installment of a franchise. You know, the 4th installment, Bride of Chucky, we get that character of David who's gay, but that's really it. We get the non-straight that is the default, as Simon Spear says in Love, Simon, Why is Straight the Default? We get the non-defaulted character introduced in a 4th installment of this franchise. We get a 5th character introduced, no, 2nd character introduced in the 5th installment, and I don't remember all of Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky, so we're going to watch it, we're going to pay attention to things, but the timeline checks out. 1998 to 2004, when this film came out, is 6 years, and it's 6 years later, and then we get a 5-year jump at the end. So 2009 is where this story leads off. We'll see what year Curse of Chucky starts. We'll see if anybody mentions something. I'm so happy I finally got my Bride of Chucky dolls out and ready to bring on the spooky Halloween season. But it's such a great franchise, bro. I'm really happy it genre swapped as well, that it went from horror slasher to horror comedy. It's just fun when you see certain properties switch for the sake of the characters. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it's cool watching that, but it's also cool seeing the inspiration that Don had a lot of inspiration from that Ed Wood film for Glenn and Glenda, obviously, but he also had a lot of inspiration from the Scream franchise, and you could see it. So it's neat seeing that. It's neat seeing all of this come together. It's neat seeing this as a cohesive story. So far, we are now going into the 6th installment, which is Curse of Chucky, I believe. And yeah, we're going to see what happens next. On to the next review. Mahalo.